Okay, I'm Jeff, and I have Sarah here with me. Sarah has been on, or she hasn't been on Paul's channel, but she's had a conversation with Paul before. She's been on the Rando's channel before, recently on the second installment of A Grief Observed reading that we've done with Job and Luke, and this last one we had with Caleb and Tripp and Sarah, of course, and myself. And so I wanted to invite Sarah to just share a little bit of her story with everybody who's watching this or listening to this on the new podcast that Job has gotten approved on iTunes called Bridges of Meaning. So if you haven't, if it's easier for you to listen than it is to watch on YouTube, Job's been doing a really good job of curating all the conversations, the ones from the Discord and the ones that have been posted up here on the Randos United channel, and putting them out there for you to just listen to audio. So anyway, I'll just hand it over to you, Sarah, and give you a chance to tell everybody a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. Yeah, I did have an opportunity to have a conversation with Paul, but there were just some things in there that weren't mine to tell, so it ended up staying private. So yeah, hopefully I can kind of give a bit of a background here. I've been a long time lurker. I haven't been super active in the comments and whatnot, but I've enjoyed getting to know people through the Discord and different things. So it's been fun. But yeah, I don't know, I guess I'll just kind of go back to the beginning. I grew up in Texas. In my conversation with Paul, I talked about how as a child I always had this tendency to feel like an outsider. So there were many situations in my childhood where either my family or the relationships that surrounded us were such that I was the odd one out. So my entire family was athletic. I was not. I was the artistic, awkward. I remember there was a picture of me. I was homeschooled as well. And anyway, there's a picture of this homeschool track meet, and I'm standing there with a group of friends, and they all have their blue ribbons, and I have my 3 purple ribbons of shame for participation. So it's like the last one in the race and all that sort of thing. And to grow up in a family of athletes, it's just, I don't know, it's just, it can be challenging. There were some other situations where my dad was actually a tennis pro, so he taught tennis at a local country club, and because we were at this country club, we lived in the country club, and yet we didn't have much money. And so it was always this strange tension of knowing that we were significantly below the income levels of the kids and people that we were spending time with. So it was always this trying to compensate for that, and I was very aware of it as a child too. So I was always very conscious about what I was wearing and how I appeared and things like that. And I also always felt like I didn't fit in as far as with the most of the girls. I liked to run around and play outside and make mud pies and collect lizards and reptiles, and I love bugs and insects and just things that the typical girl wasn't interested in, and I didn't care about dolls and babies and things like that. And then there were also some significant moments where people said things to me about my lack of these things that really stuck with me. And it's amazing when you're a kid, very, very impactful statements that can just resonate through your entire life and really shape how you view yourself. Like, it's amazing how those things can cause you to think this way about yourself to such a degree that you don't even pursue the thing. So in the case of, athleticism, I mean, these 2 or 3 comments that I ended up hearing when I was a kid basically affected me so much that I just quit even trying to do anything. It was like it was settled. It was like it was settled. Like these 2, 3 people said these things. I'm obviously different from my family, so I'm just gonna give up. And I basically did until I don't know, I've gotten much more active in the past couple of years. I mean, but it's really been recently. And I've realized, man, this stuff is not true that I've been telling myself all these years. And I'm actually I really enjoy, getting out and biking and exercising, and I'm not that bad, so, so yeah, my, I guess I could talk a little bit about my church background.
Yeah.
I was raised in a mixture of evangelical type situations. My parents first started out when they first became Christians, which they met in college, and kind of through FCA became Christians.
Okay.
Through that, and then started attending a Presbyterian church for a couple of years when I was just a little baby. And then they ended up at a non-denominational, it was kind of a Baptist-y church, probably more Calvinistic.
And this
you know,
was
some
in
good,
Texas?
and this was in Texas. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so I spent my younger years there through middle school. About the time I was probably 13 or so, the church went through a really difficult, I would say, a friendly split. So it was not incredibly contentious, but it still affected a lot of people. Just when churches split like that, it's hard on relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do remember going through that. And as they left that church, kind of the reasoning behind it was that it was getting just dry. And at that time, there was the charismatic movement was kind of coming through the area, and my parents had been involved in different kind of revival type meetings. Lots of prophetic traveling prophets were coming through, and I think you have some familiarity with this type of thing. Not everyone does. I was just listening to Paul and Leitner's conversation with Paul, and a lot of the things that he described is exactly what we were involved in, and so that kind of brought about. So we ended up moving to this really charismatic church, and my parents' intentions were really to seek an experience of God that they felt that they were missing. And this church was very alive, and they were very, emotive, and seemed to be desiring the Spirit and all these things that are good things to do. And I think the church maybe started out in a decent place, but as it progressed, it got more and more involved with like the Word of Faith movement. And so the Kenneth Copeland's, the TV pastor type people. Hang on, let me shut this. It's dinging.
I'm having to turn the Discord off too.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Oh, that's a down the rabbit hole invention.
Yeah. Right. Yep. It's a time suck. Yeah. So it was like the frog in the pot of boiling water. It just slowly got less and less healthy. And I think as the church started it started growing, and as that happened, the pastor and his wife became more and more controlling, and it got more more intense with the word of faith stuff. And so it was also a Joshua Harris, I Could Say Goodbye was really big with the youth. And being homeschooled, I did not like being homeschooled at all. I was a pretty rebellious teenager, and I wanted to be out of the house. And it was more of a motivation from my mother to shelter me and to shelter us. I mean, that was kind of the intention for being homeschooled. And, you know, she had gone through a lot of trauma as a child. And so that was her motivation. She wanted to protect us from the things that she experienced. And so it's understandable, you know, I mean, I think about my own kids and I understand, but at the same time, it was just, it made our relationship very tense. And so at this church, I mean, really my only friends were in the church. Most of them were homeschooled as well. And so it just became very closed off, this little group of people that was at this church, and only listening to certain speakers, and there wasn't a lot of outside interaction with other people. And so it almost became, I mean, it definitely had some cult, it wasn't a cult, but ended up having some cult-like tendencies. And so I spent pretty much my high school years there. I was involved in the music. So I've always played piano and led worship and things like that. So that was probably my saving grace. I don't know if I would have, I don't know if I'd made it through those years without that. There was just a lot of dysfunctional relationships with the teenage girls in the church. And I just think about that time in my life, and it just feels icky, you know what I mean? But the music was something that I did get in touch with, you know, just that experience of feeling connected and that there was a God and that sort of thing. I will say though that certain relationships that my parents had, even within that you know, destructive type environment, were deep and meaningful, and I saw the connections that were real and the ones that were false. I consider myself a pretty discerning, perceptive person, and so I could very much sort out who was fake and who was genuine. And so, you know, I did see that. I think my experiences of staying connected to the church throughout my life have been tied on, or have been based around the healthy relationships. Because of the situations I've been in, my trust in institutions has not, or in church communities and leadership had been damaged. But I did have trust that there were genuine relationships, and that my parents went through some situations where I saw people gather around them and, you know, support them and be there for them, you know, really traumatic, challenging stuff. And when you see people, I don't know, when you see people express that sort of love, it impacts you deeply. So yeah, all that to say, I get through my teen years, and we weren't allowed to date. It was kind of a church rule. It was also my parents were, you know, they were obviously in agreement with it, but it became something that was enforced and regulated by, you know, the church authority. And me being the not so compliant child, you know, I had secret boyfriends behind behind the scenes. And
where did you find these secret boyfriends, being homeschooled?
Oh, I mean, they were all there. They were all in the same community.
Oh, so, okay.
Yeah. So we'd like meet at the library, you know.
Oh, scandalous.
I know. I know. It was.
You guys read Nietzsche while you were there?
Yeah, right. Yep, yep. Yeah, I wish maybe that would have been better. Yeah. So anyway, um, I had one in particular where we actually were both on the worship team, and it was I being so concerned about how I appeared, because I struggled with weight as a child too. So I was kind of a chubby kid and kind of had a bad relationship with food, and um, like really bad acne. And so I I kind of, I guess you could say, came out of all that and blossomed when I was about 16 or 17. And um, because I had because I had kind of made all of these things the I don't know, the standard for acceptance. So it's like if I could appear to fit in, if I could be appreciated for these things, and then I could feel like I fit. Um, and so a lot of seeking out relationships with these secret boyfriends and things. I don't know. It was not because I was in love with any of them. It was a lot about just tension and seeing how I could I don't know. Yeah, I mean, just to make my ego feel better because of all the years of feeling like I was unnoticed and overlooked and
Mm.
um teased, things like that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to prove that that I'm worthy, I guess.
Yeah.
Um so anyway, one of these relationships was discovered by the pastor's daughter, and I ended up being reprimanded and removed from the worship team, and kind of a public shaming almost. And this was not approved by my parents. It was just done. And so that was kind of one of the main things. There were a lot of other situations that occurred that, you know, that pushed them to take the step to get out of this church. But I was so devastated by that. I mean, it was one of those things that, and the thing is I was blamed for the whole thing too. So the guy was able to keep his position, but
Hmm.
I wasn't. Yeah. It was very much in that culture of like, the girls were very, um, like we were told it was our responsibility to keep the boys pure,
Right.
and so we were all, it's not like we had to wear long skirts and things, like I think you said your conservative denomination was like that.
Yeah. No pants.
Yeah.
No
So
makeup.
it wasn't like that, but it was still such that, it could be our fault if the men stumble, kind of a thing. And which I feel like is, I mean, I have a an appreciation for modesty, and I think it's important, but the motivation in that situation was just, it was a bit messed up.
Well, and
Anyway.
how it played itself out in the specific example that you're giving, to illustrate,
Yeah.
how that would manifest itself, how it would embody itself. I don't think that's the spirit of modesty to say,
Right.
well, this is
Yeah.
clearly the woman's fault and not or the girl's fault and not the boy that's involved as well.
Yeah.
He
Mhm.
couldn't help himself. You knew better.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Exactly. Yeah.
as as someone who's been a boy, that's not true.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So a little dysfunctional. But it also, it's funny, situations like that, like, because it was made such a point of focus, it almost made me, so because of my rebellious nature, it made me want to pursue that when I could get away with it more than I would have if it hadn't been a focus. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, you're telling me this is a really big deal and that I can get a huge amount of attention just by wearing this or that. So, wow, that's great. So it's focusing on the negative side of things instead of focusing on the positive. So, like why I think this is, I have two daughters. So I'm like, I want them to be modest. I don't want them to expose themselves to the world. But I think it's more talking about the positive aspects of modesty versus trying to scare you away
Hmm.
with the other side of it and shame you. So,
Hmm.
so yeah. So I get kicked off the worship team. I'm pretty disillusioned. A lot of and also the boy, this is getting into high school teenage drama. It seems so silly, but it was so life altering at the time,
Hey, there's a reason this stuff sells on,
Oh,
things like
I know.
CW and
I know it.
all
It's
those other
true.
shows.
Yeah. So there's a lot of just silly girl drama. Like my good friend also really had a crush on this boy, and so it was like our friendship was damaged through all of it. And
Oh no.
yeah, and she was one of a different daughter of the pastor, and she also played piano, but she wasn't as good as I was. And so there's this whole just battle of the egos that was just gross.
Battle of the ulterior motives too. It
Yeah, I
sounds
know.
like.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, and then there was a situation where my mom was like, she was just volunteering to help bring meals to someone who had a baby or something, I don't know. And she got called into the church office and told that she was out of line and that she had to ask permission before she did that. I mean, it started to get really weird. There were quite a few actually lower class kind of poor people in this church, and financially, because of the prosperity gospel type message that was very prominent. The pastor and his wife had lots of nice things. At one point, I mean, they had a new car. They had, at one point, the church went in together and bought him this big gaudy diamond ring, and it just was, and all in the name of, if you give, you're gonna, you give to get, basically. So it's this transactional
Pressed
situation.
down, shaken together.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh. Yeah. And so just, I think once that situation happened with me, it caused them to just kind of take a step back and really reevaluate. I know it sounds like, how could you be in a situation like that? Because my parents they're smart people, they're college educated, they're not, they're not dummies. But it's like you get into a situation like that, and it's your life and it's your friends, and you start to be deceived. And I mean, I totally understand how people get into cults and different situations like that. There is a sense of community to it, um, but anyway, things just started to spiral out of control. And so we left, and I kind of had a blow up with my parents at the same time. And this was right around the time I was graduating high school. So I just left. I mean, I found the first college I could get into, and was out of there. you know and it was actually a Christian school in Dallas. Well, it was Dallas Baptist University. You probably are
Yes,
familiar
I know some people
familiar with
who've
that.
graduated from there.
Yeah. Yep. That for me was just a terrible time of my life. Like that year, I was only there a year. Actually, my sister and brother went there, and they had a great experience later. I
Okay.
just, I went back to the campus, and I was just like, oh man. But like, I did not get in with a good friend group. I was not involved in church. I was at a point where I was tired of rules and boundaries, so I just kind of let myself go.
Hmm.
I was like, gave myself over to the passions, if you will, from feeling so stifled.
Hmm.
But it didn't take me very long to realize, okay, my parents, they had some good points, and and if I continue down this path, it's not going to be a good situation for me. Um, and I just got really depressed and, you know, felt alone and isolated and just, yeah, separated from everyone and everything. Um, so I ended up coming back home and it's like, I don't know, there had been times in my life where I had felt I never went through a period, I'll say this, I never went through a period of time where I was like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe that this is real. But I never really, no one ever really provided me with a path to growth. It was like, it was all either about around some sort of ecstatic experience, which I never related to all of that. Like I didn't do the jumping and the shouting and the
Hmm.
speaking in tongues and all that stuff. It seemed like people were doing it for, you know, attention. And I mean, who am I to judge what's really like real and what's not? I don't know. Have you seen? This is a really interesting segue. Um, there's a special by this guy named Darren Brown called Miracle. It's on Netflix. Have you
I
heard of
haven't
this
seen
at
it.
all?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, he was raised in a charismatic church and is now would consider himself an atheist. He's like a hypnotist now.
I think he was
And
on Justin Brierly's Unbelievable podcast. I haven't listened to
yeah,
it, but I think I saw that name there.
yeah. So he has a really interesting story. If you look him up, the Netflix special, yeah, it's called Miracle. He goes in and uses the same exact language and techniques that someone like Benny Hinn would use
Hmm.
and heals people. I mean, you got to watch it. It's
Hmm.
crazy. And it just makes you think, okay, these psychological techniques, for one thing, it's amazing the ability that the body has to actually heal itself.
Yeah.
But it I don't know. And like I'm one that I think that things crazy things can happen, but it's really hard to sort for me. Like
Yes.
what is just psychological or is just psychological not actually real. You know what I'm saying? Like it
Yeah, I think this dovetails well into what we wanted to talk about in this
uh-huh, uh-huh.
conversation, which I'm not
Yeah.
ready to steer it there just yet, but I think
Yeah.
that really blends well with what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So I'll kind of leave it there and kind of wrap up. I mean, I'll kind of breeze through the rest of my story. Anyway, so I came back home, kind of got back on my feet, um, reconciled with my parents, pretty well. Ended up going back to school at Texas A&M and found a found a good group of people there. Got back into church, started playing on the worship team at a church there, which was kind of I mean, it was a good place for me. It was really plain vanilla, and I had been in crazy, and so I needed just some stability,
Hmm.
and I
You've
was
been
able
in
to get.
chaos.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't really challenging me necessarily. Although I did get into a good small group we had some really good conversations, but I still feel like I was just kind of weaving in and out of, um, I don't know. I struggled with just lying to myself and lying to others and kind of living double lives. And so I would kind of go back and forth, between pretending to be doing well and actually opening up. And so it's a process. It's a process to figure all that stuff out.
Mm.
Trying to figure out who I was, like what my role was, and how I could be valued in a positive way. A lot of the relationships I was in, especially that first year of college, were just really, really, I don't know how to put it. Um, well, just focused on the physical side,
Mm.
and um, I didn't feel valued. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
More used. So um, let's see. So yeah, my college years, it was kind of this back and forth process, but I felt like I was slowly, making some steps forward, and towards the end of my time there, I met my husband I was getting close to graduating, and I'd realized that I hadn't found anyone. Like, I always had desired to be married and have a relationship, because my parents always did emphasize the importance of family and the importance of, and I very much admired their relationship, and watched them go through struggles, and stay together through everything. And so I wasn't just going to marry the first person that came along. Like, I had pretty high standards as far as that went. So as far as marriage, dating was a different issue, but anyway. But I finally got to the point where it's like, okay, if I want this type of person, I have to be that type of person too.
Yeah.
So so we met online, actually, because we were getting close to graduating. My roommate and I, more as a joke, just were like, we're gonna make profiles on eHarmony. And so
That's the place where Christians go, is eHarmony.
I know, right. And this is kind of right before.
The ones who won't go to, well, was it before Christian Mingle? The ones who wouldn't stoop to Christian Mingle went to eHarmony.
Yeah, exactly. You had to go through the whole process of questions, and
oh yeah,
it was a little more intense. So yeah, I did that. I did not have many expectations. It was more like, this is just a fun thing to do. But within like 2 weeks, I met my husband. I hardly talked to anyone else but him. I mean, I maybe exchanged an email or two with a couple other people, but it was really like, we met and we knew pretty much right away. And so we met online, started talking. He is, well, where we live now is North Dakota. So that's why I call myself a frozen Texan, because I spent my entire childhood, young adult years in Texas, and now I live in the coldest state in the US. So we met 2 weeks after. We met face to face 2 weeks after we met online, and then we were married 8 months later. So it was pretty fast. And I think because it was so quick, and because I had still kind of not figured things out, marriage does something to in that it really forces you to deal with your flaws and your weaknesses and all of those things, and brings them to the surface. So it was, and then here I am again in another kind of outsider situation. So I'm moving from, a city, more of a city type situation in Texas, to out in the middle of nowhere, no friends that I am familiar with, all of his friends, his family, which there are some wonderful people, but it still can be challenging to come into it. And he's also, we live on a farm, so he's a fifth generation farmer, and that was all new. And when you come into an established situation like that, it's like, it's really difficult to try and figure out what your role is, especially when you have a personality like me who wants to be an individual and to make my own way and my own name. There are kind of these established roles that people do here, so anyway, I think because we've been married almost 12 years now, and we have 3 kids. So it's been an interesting journey. We've been through some challenging situations, but I think the structure of marriage and family has impacted me more than anything could. I don't know where I would be right now. I told Josh, if I hadn't met him, I'd probably be like a homeless musician or something.
Austin's the place for that.
Yeah, exactly. I probably would have been there. I probably would have. Because he's very structured and orderly, and I'm just extremely high in openness, and I like to sit around and daydream, and so we do complement each other well. I told Paul in our conversation that I had an Old Testament prof who said that the word for helpmate in Genesis, when he describes Eve was actually properly translated as a fitting adversary, and it's very, very appropriate for our relationship. So,
Yes.
so yeah, I think I just feel incredibly grateful for the things that I don't know. I'm like, I don't see how the direction that my life, the choices that I made in the direction my life was headed. Like I sometimes I'm just like, I don't know how I'm here. Like it's overwhelming sometimes to look around me and see my, beautiful kids and, wonderful place to live. And yet at the same time, with all of that, I've struggled with feeling a lack and feeling like, I don't fit, and not knowing what my role is and feeling out of place and all those things. So I went through a pretty low period right after our third baby was born, and just really down. She was a challenging baby. It's one of the hardest things you ever go through. It's just like she didn't eat well, and she didn't sleep on her own. Like I had to hold her all the time. It's just so draining. But it was actually around that time when I came upon the Jordan Peterson stuff and found all of that, and that was actually it was just a really key part of this past year and a half, of really climbing out of a lot of that and figuring out my role in the broader Christian story, and how Christ reveals himself to us through our particular situations. So like, I don't know, Peugeot talks a lot about the outsider and the foreigner, and if you look in the Bible, I mean, you see this pattern. If you recognize it, this pattern appears over and over again of like the outsider coming in and redeeming the situation. And I mean, I don't know, I can tell kind of more details of that story maybe another time. But anyway, some really key impactful moments that hit me, that made me realize that, my experiences of God were actually real. And I guess we can maybe tie that in and talk about it a little more as we go on.
Yeah, I guess that's as good a place as any to start talking about that.
That was not a short intro, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's making up for the video that we didn't get to see that you had.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things, to go back to Darren Brown, that you talking about, that reminded me of when you were talking about, and I haven't seen the documentary, but one of the thoughts that I had where you mentioned, he would go in there and he would use a lot of the same techniques, and I haven't watched any of Vervaeke's videos other than what Paul has played, but I'll steal his word. Psychotechnology is almost what you could call it, as I understand that phrase to mean. But when you said, it's amazing people would get healed and how the body can heal itself, the first thought that popped into my mind was, well, the body healing itself, and to me, could be like a God number one type thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the body healing itself, it's looking at the body as having intent, and looking at the body as, being connected to, this I'm going to say version of God, or this way of thinking about God as, okay, I'm going to move where I'm going to move, and there's going to be some healing. And yes, the body will respond sometimes to these things, but sometimes not. It's just a mystery. You never know when it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then the other thought that it reminded me of is, there's so many stories in Scripture where, probably the best known one is in one of the Mosaic stories, where he goes in and, he brings the staff before the Pharaoh, and it turns into a snake, and then you know, the sorcerers in Pharaoh's council do the same thing.
Yep.
And, you know, he uses his staff to show the wonders of God to make the water into blood, and then the sorcerers go and do the same thing. And so it's like, you know, that's what it reminded me of. That it sounded like it had echoes of those type stories. And so, like exactly what you're saying, it's so hard to sort it out and to say, you know, when you were mentioning the tradition that you grew up in, you know, where people would get very well, I love Paul A's word charismania.
It's such a perfect way to describe it.
Perfect way to describe it. And
exactly
it
how it
doesn't,
feels.
you know, some people could think of that as derogatory. It's not necessarily derogatory, right? Because you don't know. Some people think, oh, I know that that's disingenuous and that's fake. And it's certainly possible that for some people it could be, but there are other people that I know that are very genuine and are very much tied up in all that. And I don't doubt their authenticity for a second. And yet it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, that's God. And it's hard for me whenever I have experiences where, who knows, maybe it is God, and it's still hard for me to say, even in my own circumstances, oh yeah, that was God, you know, because there's probably something in me. It's probably pride, or it's probably some axiom that needs to be broken down, where it's just like, I just feel gross when I say that. It just feels icky, you know. It doesn't feel right. So anyway, that's just what that reminded me of. But
well, I've thought about this because he mentioned it in that video as well. Like the relationship between kind of the ecstatic, charismatic experience with psychedelics. You know, it almost feels like a I don't know, like a trick or a cheap version of what could be or what can be with a longer process. So I grew up in a lot of circles I was raised in. It was very much like, if we can have these miracles, if people can be healed, then that will prove and that God is real and people will come. Well, Darren Brown can do miracles.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, so it just, for me personally, I think, I mean, yes, that can happen, and yes, I think it can be useful, but it's a lot harder to discern. The experiences of God that I've had in times of suffering, and we talked about this a bit in the other conversation, but for me personally, and for the people that I have seen the hand of God working in my life, have been the ones that have been in the deepest valleys and managed to still stay strong and to still come out on the other end saying, you know, that they still are going to follow God, and their relationship with him is strengthened through that. Yeah, to me, that has such it just has such a lasting impact on, at least it has on me for sure. And I think, again, my deepest experiences of God have been times of coming out of, either in the midst of pain and tragedy, or, you know, coming out of that on the other side of it.
Well, it's so fascinating, you know, when you said something just there that made me think about, well, seeing people experience tragedy and coming out on the other side of it. I know some people who have lost, I know some people who have lost children. And it's so fascinating, like, to kind of play the what if game. You know, I know of two different people who have had some very severe injuries happen to a child in an accident. And in the one case, one of them did not live. And in the other case, the child did. And these were accidents that were caused by the parent. And both of them came out on the other side, you know, still with their faith intact. in God. And it just makes me wonder, and it doesn't seem fair at all when you think about it in this context. It's like, why couldn't both children live? But it makes me think, did one of them need their child to live to be able to hang on to God? And did the other one not? And that does not sound right or fair.
No.
I hate going in that direction. It's probably a horrible thought. But it's just an idea that it's just like, oh man, I hate venturing off into these territories. I talked about it a little bit with my conversation with Paul when I couldn't answer for Job what God is not. And it's just like, man, if God is involved in those kind of calculations, that's really, really hard to wrestle with.
It is really difficult. I mean, I know people in the same situations. Like one family, the child survived and the other one didn't. And it's just, and we were talking about asking why, and how people tend to not ask why in the good situations, and do in the times of tragedy. And yet I have tended to ask why. I mean, I think, I'm as much of a sinner as anyone, and my children are healthy, and I haven't experienced, I mean, anything to the degree that some of my friends and family have. Why? It's not I didn't do anything. And some of these people are, it's just I know that it just doesn't seem to have anything to do with who you are, or how you live in the world, because it rains on the good and the evil.
And yet, there is a way of being that, from all indications, seems like it's better. Not necessarily just based on the results themselves, but if you align with this mode of being, in some way, the quality, something about your existence is not even necessarily measurably better, but is just essentially better. And I don't think that we have the tools necessarily to even measure that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just like, if somebody could live the most, we'll say, to use church speak, the most Christ-like life.
It's a good Texas accent.
Yeah, thank you. I have a good one.
We should get real Texas in this one.
We should. Let's get Texan, Sarah. All right, now.
Y'all.
Here's what we're going to talk about, y'all. We're going to give y'all some Texas. That'll turn annoying very quickly if it hasn't already. For both of you and I and anyone else who was listening up until this point. I can't even remember what I was saying there.
Like a mode of being you were talking about.
Yeah, to live the most Christ-like life, or to live, the most, to take it into Jordan Peterson terms, or just, more symbolic terms, but to still use some Christian traditional language, logos, the most logos, the highest purpose, the highest aimed life. That person could still walk out the door tomorrow and get hit by a bus, right? It's like there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees in this life. And yet, there is some essential rightness or goodness to trying to aim for the best, to try to live a certain way. And I don't really know where to go with that thought. It just that just seems to be a part of experience as I observe it and as I move through it myself.
Well, and I think it comes down to I think it seems like to me, it comes down to the character of the person. So that's why I feel like people that I've seen go through traumatic situations and withstand them and come out on the other side, their character is so incredibly evident, as they're being watched going through these things. And not that they don't struggle, and not that it's not painful and difficult and all of that, but I've also seen people completely collapse. And I just hope, I guess I just pray and hope that if something like that would happen to me, that I would have the strength and the character to, I don't know, the growth, the depth, whatever it might be, to make it through and to transform whatever the situation is into good. I think of that story you told when you were, the story from the Great Divorce, the lust lizard. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that illustration. And I think about that all the time. Because I've seen things in my own life that have been retrospectively transformed in my own life.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it's like, it gives me hope that everything will eventually be transformed in that way.
Yeah, you see so much in life where, again, it's the why that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I just got hit with I'm sure being in worship and music that Amy Grant.
Yes.
But that song, Somewhere Down the Road, I don't know if that's the name of it, but that's in the chorus. Somewhere down the road, there will be answers to the questions. But I don't know, that just popped into my head. And that is really the only hope, that I can hang my hat on at the end of the day. And I talked about this in my first conversation with Paul. It's like, that's the only way that I can make sense of life, is if it's beyond an answer to a question. I get the point of her song, or at least I think I do, but it's not. Paul Vanderklay makes a really good point. It's not that all the suffering and the pain in this world, and particularly the things that need to be set right, will just, it didn't matter. It was all just a dream. It was all, I'm not expressing it the way that he probably would if he were talking right now with us. But it's just like, there is, the evil in the world is very real, and it leaves very deep scars. And it's not just going to be butterflies and rainbows that stand in the place of that and just go, oh, okay. That wasn't a big deal. And at the same time, in scripture, it talks about the things that are so horrible in this world are, I'm going to get this metaphor wrong. I can't remember if is going to pale in comparison or can't pale in comparison. Whichever one I'm trying to say,
I get it. Yeah.
It's going to be so much more satisfying, where the balance will far exceed the sufferings and the evil of this life. And I know full well that as you're going through it, that's very soft talk. That doesn't help. Exactly what Tripp was talking about, exactly the comment that Job made in our Grief Observed conversation, the second one, where he said, don't try to talk reason to me when I'm in a sea of emotion. But it's like a story. So I'm trying not to betray any confidences here, because that easily keeps us from putting videos up of other people. But I know people who do not like as far as movies go or TV shows, that do not like any form of entertainment that is not like happy and fluffy, like predominantly all the way through. Like there can be little conflicts here and there, but they need to be quickly resolved, and I need to feel good, throughout the whole experience. And I'm a little more patient with my film or my TV show or even my book, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I
Where
understand that.
if if the character, that if the writer or the author is really good, has gotten you deeply invested in and really care about, and then something just terrible happens to that character where you're just like, oh God, and it like hurts you because you empathize so much with that character. I know people who are just like, I'm out. I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. I'm not going to watch the rest of this. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And I have this hopefulness about me that's just like, let's wait, give it a minute. Let's see what kind of tale is being woven here. Let's see what kind of story we're in. Let's see what the conclusion is, right? My favorite movies are the ones that really, gut punch me or take me down this one path where I'm just like, how are they going to resolve this? I just can't see any way out of it. And that they don't do like a Deus Ex Machina type thing where it's just like, oh yeah, and everything's better. It's just like this thing magically happens and it's fixed. But ones where the story is told just so well, where it's just like, oh my gosh, all of the suffering is enmeshed and intertwined in the resolution itself. And the stories that are told that have that theme running through them are the ones that just resonate with me so much. And that's where my hope comes from, that these are reflections of the greatest of the story that we are in. We are all stories as individuals. I think that's becoming more and more evident and true to me. And we get to play a part in the story, and we get to be or sub, as Michael pointed out to me, to use the Tolkienism, we are sub-creators. We get to be sub-creators of our own story and sub-creators of this greater story of existence. And my hope is that all of these different threads of storylines, which we are all interweaving and coming to this culmination that doesn't come to a close in its resolution, but instead opens up into this infinite, just ever expanding resolution that is just better and better and better at each turn, where you're just like, oh, this thing that I thought I was seeing over here, no, I was so wrong. And I'm so happy and ecstatic to find out what this turned into and what it's becoming. And I feel like I'm ranting like a crazy person now. So it's
It's great. I was just going to ask you, what are a couple of specific examples of what you feel have been genuine experiences of God?
So I told Job this one, and this was on one of my lists of something to talk about with Paul, where I was saying, hey Paul, I'm Alex Trebek. What category do you want? And it was my conversion story. And this is still even one where I'm just like, it's still hard for me. Like rationalist is wrong. Esther, I'm sorry. Luke is colonizing me. In an empiricist framework, I still, the empiricist side of my consciousness Congress, to use a Paulism, is, I can't explain this. If you ask me to prove this in an academic setting, no, I'm sorry, it's not even for that forum. But that doesn't make it less true for how it's impacted my life. Whenever I was 4 years old, we went to church from the time that I was born. I don't ever remember not going to some type of a church setting. And for mine, early on, it had very cult-like tendencies. But I don't think it was an actual cult by, Mary, who's been on Paul's channel and has talked to Luke on this channel as well. By her standards, I think she would say, no, technically that's not a cult. And I'm like, okay, good. But Job, I can't remember which question he asked me whenever we met down outside of Austin for lunch. But I told him, when I was 4 years old, I remember being, alone in the bathroom of our house and just feeling this presence. And I feel like I had been prepped for it. in church. You know, I'd been told about asking Jesus into your heart, to use that, you know, fundamental type evangelical language. And I just remember being there in the bathroom and almost sensing like this change in lighting. And this change in lighting type feeling has happened to me before, but I immediately, as an adult, recognized it in my empiricist framework. And I was just like, you know, I'm skipping ahead for just a second, and then I'll come back to it. But this change in lighting, the way that I felt it was being in this singles worship service that was in Dallas. It was, you know, basically a meat market for Christian singles who wanted to find someone. And I remember being in that worship service right before, you know, the guy came up and delivered his little sermon. And I remember like closing my eyes and I'm like, God, I want to experience this thing that it seems like so many people experience in these charismatic circles that I had been in and grown up in throughout different periods of my life. And I feel silly about it, but, you know, God, I just want to know that you're there. And I had my eyes closed and I was kind of looking up, and all of a sudden I could feel like a change in light coming down on me. And inside I was like, whoa, this is really happening. And then I opened my eyes and I was like, oh, they're just changing the lighting here in the sanctuary. But for a moment, you know, that's what it felt like. And that's very easily an argument from an empiricist standpoint to say, okay, so Jeff, there's no real presence of anything there. You know, this can all be explained by, this is all explicable in a Occam's razor kind of way, you know. And I think people, that term has taken on a different meaning. It's probably not in the actual original meaning. But then, so to go back to my experience in my childhood home, there was a change in lighting, and it was almost like this strange ambient lighting. And I can even look back at it from an empiricist frame and say, yeah, it was like the change in the sun. It was a cloud going past the sun outside, and it comes out. But that goes back to the God number one, the body heals itself kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just like if there is this broad power or this broad force that can and does and is a part of everything that's around us, well then why can't that force at that moment, you know, have orchestrated this cloud to move out of the way? Anyway,
and I think the fact that your attention was drawn to that phenomena at that moment as well. Like I have a very similar story in that on three separate occasions, when I was at a really low point in my life, I've heard a dove. And I've heard doves everywhere. You've seen changes of light, but it's like at that thing happening at that time with, you know, that grabbed my attention. It was like, it was as clear as anything that I was being told through this dove that I was seen and heard and felt and known. And yeah, I mean, 3 separate times. And it's like, does that just happen? I mean, again, like I could explain it. Everyone who's
yeah, I'm sorry. It's just funny, you know, when we start then to really explore the rich symbolism, and I haven't delved into Pajot a great bit. The most that I've, you know, gotten out of Pajot is some of the stuff that you shared with me in that post that you shared with me. But I remember recently in a Paul Vanderklay video where he posted part of his Sunday school lesson. I don't know if you got a chance to watch that, but he talked about, he said, what he was talking about Jesus cleansing the temple, but he focused on doves for a second. And he said, what do doves symbolize? And one person said peace. And that was the first thing that I was thinking too. And then he said, yep, peace. And you know what else it's symbolized? And then I was just thinking very literally. I was like, well, it's used as a sacrifice. And that's where my brain went. But he went to, somebody else answered in a Sunday school class, the Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit.
And so, yeah, you telling that story. And then, you know, growing up in the traditions that I grew up in, it's not focused. It's kind of anti-symbolism almost. But at the same time, Paul has also brought up the point that many times whenever, pastors in that tradition are delivering their sermon, they're being very symbolic with the points that they're trying to make out of it too. And so I'm at the point now where it's just like, it's just inescapable. It's so inescapable because even language itself is symbolic, and I know you've delved into Barfield quite a bit. And in the Paul V, I like using that because it's just it's so hard for me to say Paul A's name. I've gotten Vanderklay, down, but where Paul V starts talking about that segment in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where the professor takes the kids through that logic exercise about Lucy. And in my mind, I'm thinking of Lewis and potentially the connection that he's even making right there, where like I've read enough Lewis now to where I can see, and I'm starting to learn, he's working out some of his own stuff here in the thing that he's building. And when I heard, I can't remember which conversation it was at this point, but I think it was Mark Vernon, and it was either Mark Vernon on Unbelievable or it was Mark Vernon whenever he talked to Michael from Paul's channel and now who I had a conversation with on this channel. But Mark Vernon said that, Lucy in the Chronicles of Narnia is Barfield's daughter's name. And it was a very clear connection. Or maybe it was Geit who said that anyway, doesn't matter who said it. But the point is, as I'm hearing Paul retell that section of the Chronicles of Narnia, I'm thinking Lewis is kind of working out his own skepticism about some of the ideas that Barfield was seeding in him regarding the symbolism of language, and if the imagination can be used as a better instrument to locate truth than a rational or as reason can be used. And that thought just occurred to me as he was telling that story, and I was like, oh wow. And so words, and Lewis even talked about this somewhere. It perhaps was in Miracles. It's failing me now, but he just talks about, you can't get away from metaphor just by trying to change the words. You can't say, and I think this was in a conversation on the Meaning Code channel between Karen and I think it was Michael, but I can't remember for sure, where, she talked about one thing where you try to use something besides the Father to talk about, God and the relationship between God and Jesus. But another place where Lewis talks about it is he says, I can say something like, I see your point, but that's an abstraction, because what do we know of as a point? If we're thinking about it literally, we could think like the end of a sharp object, or we could think about, a dot on a piece of paper. But it's that those things are not what we mean when we say to one another, oh, I see your point. And it's because language is a symbol that represents something beyond language. And so symbolism itself is just rooted in our very experience and our ways of communicating with one another. There's this, I'll say one more thing, is just riffing on this. There's this one concept, and I haven't read a lot of Madeleine L'Engle, but my wife loves Madeleine L'Engle, and I respect Madeleine L'Engle because she loves C.S. Lewis. So I need to read more Madeleine L'Engle, and you take the good, you take the bad, and now I was about to sing the Facts of Life song, but there's this, I'm not going to pronounce it right probably, but there's this concept that she presents in one of her sci-fi books of, maybe it's not even the sci-fi one, it's called Kything, Kything, I think. And it's this way of two people being able to communicate with each other without using language anymore. It's like being so present with that person, where there is that shared knowing and knowledge between one another. And I think it's probably like, you're probably going off into, new age spiritual land here. But, I think that there's a little bit of truth in everything. And I think that there is probably, I like playing what if a lot. And, in what if, the ultimate way that we communicate just has nothing to do with the language, you know, that we're using. Like the language that we're using is just, it's just us bumbling along to what is really out there and what is really possible. So
Yeah. Well, think about how difficult it is to communicate well just using, say, a text message. I
mhm.
mean, there's so much that you miss,
Yes,
you know? I mean, things can be completely misunderstood.
yes.
Um,
That and
especially,
autocorrect makes that really
yeah,
tough too.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. What was I going to add to that? Um, I was just going to say, like, one of the things that really that really hit me last year, kind of coming through my Jordan Peterson Peugeot moment, and really trying to discover my place and my role. One of the phrases that was kind of my phrase of the year last year was discover the beauty in the ordinary. So my personality, I always feel like the good or the thing that I'm supposed to be or become is out there rather than right here in front
Mhm.
of me. And I think I I have always felt a loss of the magic that I felt as a child. I always felt like the world and that my surroundings were enchanted. I mean, I was very much, you know, like I loved being in nature. I would go and sit outside for hours just waiting for the chipmunks to come and eat out of my hand. And I would, and at one point it was this moment that was so, you know, I mean, I can't put it any other way than to say magical. That there was this butterfly flying by, and I reached up to grab it, and I just like lifted this butterfly right out of the sky, and it just held it, and it sat on my hand. And I mean, like things like that, and the doves, you know, things like that happened to me, that I feel like were just slowly turned gray over the years as you grow into an adult. And one thing that has come back to me over the past year in discovering the symbolism of things is that things have started to re-enchant in that way. And I think,
Mm.
you know, reading Barfield and Peugeot especially has helped me to discover that, you know, it's almost like I told Peugeot this one time because I had a conversation with him. I said, it's like my world has changed from black and white back into color.
Mm.
Um, because it's in saving the appearances, it's, you know, it's all about how do we find the, you know, the spiritual, the infinite spiritual, I guess you would say, logos of a thing, um, through, like, you, I don't know, there are just things you cannot know outside of our interaction with the material world. I mean, all of our abstractions, like you said, come from embeddedness, and embodiment and experience. And so at one point I was just thinking, I was sitting, it was actually at my parents' house, and I'd been reading Barfield. I'd been, you know, just kind of in the midst of all of this stuff, and I was sitting there staring at a chair, and I was thinking about, you know, like what a chair represents, and what that means for us, and how we, you know, chairs are something that we sit in to commune together. A chair can be, in ways, a throne for a child that, you know, you're throwing a birthday party for them. You know, I have feelings of attachment towards chairs that I've sat and rocked my babies in.
Mhm.
You know, my daughter started crying because we were talking about getting rid of this chair that we used to sit and hold her in all the time, and so she has that. I mean, and it's like, and I was just looking at this chair. It was almost like it started shining, and it's like when you can see, it's almost like you can see into the object and beyond it, and it opens up almost like a portal
Mm.
into an infinite possibilities of what a chair could be. And in that instance, it's like Lewis and the animals, you know, the talking animals. It's like the chair in that moment participates in worship,
Mm.
and it's through our participation with it. You know, it's not just this object that we use to sit on. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's it, but what is the chairness of the chair,
Yeah.
and what would we be without it? Like, it's a gift. And so I've been able to, in some ways, be able to see a lot of things in my life in that same way. And I again, it's such an experience that's undeniable, and yet you have to, you can't just explain it to someone, and you can't make those sorts of experiences happen, I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And one of the thoughts that I had as you were talking about that is, my my fundamentalist roots, could say to me, and this is just me like responding to anybody who might be asking that question from a tradition like that, are, well, aren't you just kind of idolizing that object then? And my answer to that is, well, that's not really what we're talking about here. We're saying that these things that you start to see this kind of meaning in, or that you're associating this meaning with, are more like windows into God. So it's not that thing itself, it's what that thing is leading you on to. And it could be anything anywhere in the world. And so it's not an expression of worthiness towards that chair where it happened, because you might go back to that chair later and you don't have that experience anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not an expression of worthiness towards, whatever object or whatever. Let's say it's a house that you go back to where you had this grand experience in, and it's just like, well, it wasn't in the house in the first place, right? It was a gateway that was opening you up to this broader meaning and this broader experience. I don't know if that's the right word, but this, if I can put it in terms for somebody who maybe does have a fundamentalist background and fundamentalist leaning, it's opening you up to the presence of God more. And it's not saying God's that chair or I'm worshiping the creation.
Right.
It's not that at all.
Yep.
Like, it's just showing me that there are ways to get in, and they are scattered all around us. If only we could see. If only we can see. If only we can see. So.
I've thought a lot about this, and I know you need to probably go here. I'll wrap it up. I could probably do a whole conversation based around this, because I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah.
But the difference in an idol and an icon, and to me, that right there is a very clear picture of it, because I think of an idol as being something that ends in itself. And so if you see a thing, and this could happen with any material object or even an idea, as having power contained within itself, versus, like you were saying, an opening up into a connection, a part of, say, the hierarchy that points up instead of pointing in. And again, like, I've thought about that a whole lot, and I think there's a lot we could talk about. But my story about the icon, the picture of the dormition that I told in the other story of my child, and all of that stuff. Go listen to that if you want to hear that story.
This was the Grief Observed Part 2.
Yeah. That was just so evident to me. It was like, this material thing was used as exactly what you said, a window into a truth.
Yep.
And so there's nothing about the material itself that is worthy of worship, but because I participate in or with that material towards the highest thing, it all enters in to that big story.
Yeah. And I think the place where we get stuck is when we have that experience, if we get into I think Luke would say, a mechanistic way of approaching it, where we're just like, oh, okay, so this is the thing, and I'm going to keep going back to this thing, and that's going to conjure up this experience, right? If we treat it like a magic spell that we have control over, then I think that's where we go afoul. And because, again, where do you sort it out? I think sometimes you probably can continue to go after things in that way, and you will get different experiences. But it's all about your approach, right? if you're approaching it in such a way where it's like, I wish I could give a good example of this. Like I'll use a personal example, like with food. You talked about food. I've struggled with food. I still do. It's one of my favorite drugs.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a really good one. And it's like, there are diminishing returns, right? If you're like, oh man, that cake was so good, I'm going to go have me another piece. I want to continue to have this pleasurable experience. And the more I keep eating that cake, the more miserable I feel. And it just gets worse because I want more of the cake, because there's a diminishing return, but it's still so good, but it makes me feel so bad. And then I continue to feel bad residually, like after it, both physically, psychologically, mood changes. It's just terrible, And so that's just one example of, if you take an approach of, wow, I got something really great out of this magic spell of going through this practice of eating this particular, type food. And it could be anything. It could be savory. It could be sweet. It could just be something that elicits that triggers that pleasure response. It's not what we were just talking about right there, right? It's almost like I have to be in a position where I am just open to stumbling across one of those windows that shows me greater meaning. And the way that I can do that is to just find ways to better prepare myself to be able to see better. And we've been talking about a little bit, like what are some of those ways? What are those things that you can do? And I'm sure there are people that might be listening right now. If I were listening, I'd be like, just tell me, what is it? What do I need to do? And that's the point. For me, it's not necessarily that there's a formula that you can follow. And that's where I think we get back to, aiming for the logos, to embody the logos, the shooting for the best possible outcome, trying to live out the Christ life as best you can understand it in that moment. I think it might have been John Wesley's mother who said something where the point was, sin is to you, or missing the mark, or not, hitting the logos, is when you know what the target isn't, and you go ahead and choose that non-target anyway. When you know what it is that's wrong, and you say, yeah, I know it's wrong, but I'm still going to go ahead and do it. And so to me, that's when you're not following the logos. Like you're aiming for the target, and as long as you're aiming for it and you miss it, then I think you are orienting your perspective to existence in such a way where these windows will start to open for you, and you will start to have more success at getting closer to the target, in your attempts. So I don't know. That's something that I haven't done a very good job of, but it sounds good, and it's something that I want to be able to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think meaning is a big part of that. I think about food, and as a kid, I would take boxes of Thin Mints and go in my bedroom and eat them alone, and that's pretty. There's not a lot of meaning in that, and yet how much meaning can occur sharing a meal with your family or with strangers even. So that to me is a good way to decide whether or not something is pointing in the right direction. And when that experience of that chair, that shining chair, it was almost like I got these flashes, these images of all of the potential things that I could do with that chair to bring meaning into my life. It's like, people that I could have in my house, and the things, even just, giving honor to an elderly person when they walk in the room and giving them your chair. And I mean, just, it's like all of these things flashed, through my mind. And it's pretty great.
I know I'm the one who said I had to go. I don't want to keep you either. I know you've got other things to do, but there was just one other thing that I thought of.
Yeah.
And it's somewhere in one of the Pauline epistles in the Bible where he talks about, like the Greek word as I was told that it was said, and this was just in a pastor's sermon somewhere, was blepo. And the word means look out. It means look out for good things that you can be involved in existence. Look out for, and I think it was in line with all these good things have been prepared for you to be able to do as you're living out life. So be on the lookout, always be on the lookout, for these things that you can do. And that's what your little flashes of things that you could do reminded me of. So I thought that was neat.
I read a book, gosh, I can't remember what book it was. It was one of those kind of pop books on happiness. And it was talking about positivity and this can tie into all of the word of faith type stuff too, like positive thinking and all of that, which is a very real phenomenon. Like it's true because anyway, they did this experiment that they were telling a story in this book where they gave this group of college students a newspaper, and they told them that they would give them $50 if they pointed out all the photos and like counted the number of photos in the magazine or whatever it was. And they sorted them based on their proclaimed outlook on life. So you tend to see things in a positive note, then you're over in this group. And so they kept tabs on who tended to be more positive and, who was glass half full and who was glass half empty kind of a thing. Well, what they didn't tell them was on the second page of this paper, there was a big ad that said, stop right now and you'll get $100. So it was like twice as much. And it was a huge percentage of the people that tended to have a negative outlook on life didn't even see the ad. It was like 80% of them. Huh. And so it just makes you wonder, like, how does and I know it's true, the way I'm looking at the world, that is what is reflected back to me. And I'm literally going to be blind to the good if I'm not looking for it.
Yeah. Maybe that way to tie back to what I was talking about earlier for us to do it is to say, this is me talking to myself more than anything else. And I felt like David Nasser when I said that. Is if I can try to approach my day with that hopefulness of, all the evil and the bad and the horrible experiences that I see in the world and that I experience and that I empathize with other people that I know very well that are going through tough stuff, is the hope that this is going to resolve, and this is going to resolve in such a way where it will not diminish those pains and those sufferings in any way. It will somehow make them rich and somehow make them it will make you I don't want to say it because it'll sound I can sense it sounding hurtful, but it'll be, the hope is that it will all be worth it. It will all be exuberance after this. And, I don't think I can say it any better than it was said in the New Testament. And again, I never will experience this. And, you have, and so many other people out there have experienced childbirth, but it's the pain, but then also the joy that comes with that new life and that new person, that's in your life and is now a part of your story and you're a part of theirs. And so the hope is, that it's as best as we can understand what that example means, that it's so much deeper and so much more even rich than that can be. And so if we can just, if I can take a deep breath and just try to approach my day, no matter what happens, no matter what adversity comes up against me, there is going to be a hopeful resolution to this. I might not see it anytime soon, but I have to live with the hope that there's going to be more than satisfactory resolution to even the worst pain and suffering that might come up and knock me flat on my face.
Well, and that our story matters and that it is a part of the bigger story and it's connected and it's not random and it's not pointless,
Yeah. If it is, as I've said many times before, I don't want to be a part of that story.
Yeah. No.
Well, Sarah, this has been good. And
yes,
I'm glad that we got a chance to talk. This is the first time that you and it's the second time that we've talked real time.
Yeah. Not one-on-one though, so.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll end it here, but we'll talk again, hopefully. And if it goes up on here, if it doesn't, oh well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I like this, and I've liked the other conversations that people have brought to this channel, and I encourage more people to do it. I will just add this last little testimonial in here. when all of this first started for me and I started getting involved in watching Paul Vanderklay videos, I was scared to death to even post a comment because I'm so risk averse. And, now I'm
I
just,
feel you. I'm a bit that way too. So I
yeah.
understand.
And now I'm just, cavalierly just throwing long form videos with myself in them talking up on YouTube. And so who knows, something bad might happen, but if it does, I'll deal with it. And, so this is kind of my version of kind of stepping out on the edge, that line between order and chaos, and kind of testing those boundaries and seeing where I'm weak and seeing where I'm not. And so I would encourage other people to come out here and do it. And if not that, if you've somehow just stumbled across this and you're watching and maybe you didn't even get here through Paul Vanderklay, I'm going to put a link to the Discord server down in the comments here. And, if you would just want to be involved in conversations like this or just want to listen to them, there are ample opportunities out on that Discord server. And I'll put a disclaimer up. This is only if you have a lot of free time to go out onto that Discord server, or if you're very disciplined.
It's just been really fun. I mean, I listen to every conversation Paul has, and I've listened to every conversation that you posted on the Randos channel. I just think it's just so interesting to me to see how much I can learn from people, and just the variety of people that I've come into contact with through the Discord. I mean, the Discord. There's there's like Joe Lars, the forklift operator, philosopher guy, and there's the guy from Iceland, and then there's it's crazy, and it's so fun, I think. So
well, it's cool too because Joe reached out to me way back saying that he was going to be in Texas, and we met in person. Through the Discord server now, Free Range Tatanka is this person's name on the Discord
he's
server.
In Oklahoma, right?
Yeah, and he's in Dallas for the holiday weekend, and so I'm going to try to meet up with him probably right after you and I wrap up this conversation. So
great.
So that'll be good. But yeah, I would just say, because I know that there are a lot of people out there. There are people who have come to our channel and ended up on the Discord server, who have said, I have no friends. I have nobody to talk to. I am just on the internet all day and I do nothing. And so I invite people like that who are finding meaning in these conversations or looking for meaning to just come into the Discord server, because that is a part of what Joey and the Sacramento guys set it up for, is to share that meaning that a lot of people are missing. And, my hope is, what Paul says, that he uses the language, the kingdom of God, but that it just opens up these windows for meaning. And that's what the name of the server is, Bridges of Meaning. That's what Joey and company set up. And I know that's a part of their heart for what they want from all this. So that's my evangelist pitch. That's my altar call for people who are watching this.
Amen.
Well, thanks, Sarah. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to stop this thing from recording, and
all right.
Bye to everybody for now.
Yeah.